Hi folks, it's good to be with you. My website's jasonburnspreacher.com and it's lovely to be with you. I just want to share a few thoughts. I'm halfway through this book. It's called The Erosion of Calvinistic Orthodoxy by Ian Hamilton, who's Cambridge Presbyterian, who's the minister of Cambridge Presbyterian Church. So it's The Erosion of Calvinistic Orthodoxy. I would not recommend reading it, to be honest. It's quite heavy reading. I'm only halfway through it, and I just want to give, and I've read the conclusion of the book, and I just want to give my assessment of this book, and generally speaking about Calvinistic Orthodoxy and its decline. This book is a very heavy read. It's very dry, and I didn't enjoy it. And I didn't enjoy it because it was intricate details of the splits and theological debates in Presbyterian churches in Scotland from about late 1700s to the 1800s to the 19th century. So as I read the book, and I just felt entrenched in these intricate debates. Now, some of these debates I'm sure are very important. The debates about limited atonement and universal atonement and the rest of it. Some of these debates, as I said, I'm sure are very, very important. But my impression of why Calvinistic Orthodoxy eroded in Scotland, and it doesn't mention the UK, England, but I'm going to mention England, and it doesn't mention America, and I'm going to mention America. Now, there's a pattern that you can see in the 19th century Scottish Presbyterians and the Presbyterians after Gresham Machen in the mid-20th century in America. And the pattern is this, it seems to me a kind of dead orthodoxy where it's pharisaical, where it's inward looking and more interested in looking for heresies within rather than being outward looking and moving towards a kind of evangelistic missionary thrust. If you look at the Presbyterians in Korea at the turn and mid 20th century, they didn't have these kind of theological debates because they were too busy spreading the gospel. They were too busy planting churches. They were too busy fighting against a tyrannical government that wanted to lock them up and kill their people. So they're too busy involved in spreading the gospel and in mission to be bogged down with intricate theological debates. And I think that the American Presbyterians after Gresham Machen got bogged down with intricate debates rather than being outward looking and proclaiming the gospel and winning the nation for Christ. So you have the fiasco of Van Til in debate with Gordon Clark causing acrimony and division within Presbyterians, and it didn't need to be. And I think in the same way in the 19th century there was that kind of mentality of inward pharisaical fighting each other, and even today Presbyterianism is racked within Scotland with this infighting. Now, please don't think that I don't think that theology is important. But I really believe that the erosion of Calvinistic orthodoxy in the 20th century is because it lacks a warm, experimental, missionary, radical missionary thrust. If Presbyterians in Scotland, in America, spent more time going planting churches in the inner cities where they're run down, they wouldn't have time for arguing and fighting amongst each other. they'd have bigger battles to face. If Presbyterians, mission churches in America and Scotland just thought, well, why don't we plant churches in Syria and Iraq, they wouldn't have time for fighting each other. And so I kind of think it's fiddling while Rome burns. It's kind of like the Pharisees and the Sadducees arguing with each other. And like I said, I'm not disparaging the importance of some of these theological debates. They're very, very important. Don't get me wrong, but it's led to the collapse of Presbyterianism in Scotland, and it's in the deterioration of Presbyterianism in America. Now, there's more complex than that why Presbyterianism has been struggling, but I think that's one of the areas. The other area is evolution, and biblical criticism came in, and that's how it wiped out the Presbyterians in England, because the Presbyterians in England wanted to start theological seminaries with the Universities of Oxford and Cambridge, and so they did that, and they imbibed the biblical criticism of the universities, and it wiped out the Presbyterians in England. The other one is ecumenicism, and the disparaging of doctrine and the disparaging of orthodoxy is another reason why Presbyterian took a battering in the 20th century. But I think there is a major problem. Sorry. I think that there is a major problem of dead orthodoxy and of Phariseeism within Presbyterianism, and there has to be fanning into flame powerful expository preaching. There has to be fanning into flame the missionary spirit of going into all the world to preach the gospel, and there should be more plans by Presbyterians to plant churches in Syria, Iraq, to retake the UK for the gospel and be planting new churches, and that's the kind of spirit that's needed, rather than in this kind of ivory castle, theological castle, where we're living with our traditions and we're living with our great theological past and heritage, fighting amongst ourselves. That has to go, and we have to look out, and there has to be a looking out to the world, and there has to be a reaching out to the world. There has to be a new vision of mission and an experimental Christianity that's alive and vibrant and passionate and on fire for God. And rather than just in these four walls where there is this sense of we've got the doctrine, but the world is perishing. It's almost hyper-Calvinism that is set in with a lot of Presbyterians in Scotland and in America, and there needs to break out of that and realise that you need to be reaching out for the gospel and stop fighting amongst yourselves. If ministers sort of rolled up the sleeves and went into the inner city areas where there were drug addiction and prostitution and crime and Islam and all the rest of it, you went into those inner city areas, you wouldn't have time for the shenanigans and the arguments that goes on in Presbyterian circles these days. Those are my thoughts. I didn't enjoy it. To me it was dead orthodoxy. That's how it seemed to me. Some great eminent people who've written on here. Truman, loved the guy. Duncan, Legion Duncan, loved the guy. Joseph Pippa, absolutely loved the guy. Ian Hamilton, loved the guy. These are great guys, but I didn't enjoy this book by Hamilton. It just smacks of the history of a kind of an inward dead orthodoxy that is not outward looking and proclaiming the gospel. Those are my thoughts. Okay, take care.